Hello farmers, thank you for tuning into this weekly edition of your program, Agricultural New Directions, Agribusiness in support of Vision 2030. This is where we look at everything agriculture. We start with the research part of agriculture, going on to production, processing, marketing, and finally consumption. The case today, we are going to be looking at research, which is where most of our value chains here in Zimbabwe and in agriculture in general emanate from. We cannot talk of production unless we address research and development first, which is where we find our plant breeders here in Zimbabwe. Today we are going to be looking at industrial hemp in production here in Zimbabwe, beginning from the trials, which is where our plant breeders fall in. In this case, we have Dr. Kumbirai Mateva. He is a plant breeder here at Kutsaga, specializing in industrial hemp production in Zimbabwe. Dr. Mateva, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Watanai.
Yes, for the sake of our audience there at home, you would find that they might be interested and surprised, saying that ndoka mundakachwere ke industrial hembaka. But I want to emphasize that it is a trial, a demo plot that we are standing in. Maybe as we get into our discussion, a brief introduction of this patch that we are standing on, this small plot we are standing in.
Okay. So what we basically are doing is we have been given an extended mandate to work on industrial hemp. So what you see here is industrial hemp that was established essentially about 2.5 months ago, where we've taken exotic material that's coming in from a number of countries. So we are evaluating all those materials here in Zimbabwe so that we can come up with recommendations for our farmers and to also assess how the material would perform in different agroecological regions of the country.
Okay, Dr. Matewa, the sole purpose of trials that you are undertaking, how do they benefit the Zimbabwean farmer? There might be that transition with our tobacco farmers saying maybe industrial hemp might be more lucrative or more suitable or more viable for them. Because at the end of the day, farmers get into agriculture to make money, to earn a living. They might want to get into industrial hemp production. The purpose of trials, how do they serve the interests of the Zimbabwean farmer?
Okay, good question. So research is essentially the backbone of all innovations. So what we're essentially doing here is to just trying to make sure we come up with recommendations that our farmers can use. It's one thing to start growing the crop without information and knowledge, and it's another thing to grow the crop with enough information and knowledge. So what we're doing is generating enough knowledge so that our farmers, we address each and every single question that our farmers might have with regards to maybe agronomy, pest and disease management, how to harvest, how to add value, all those things. It all stems from the research arm.
Okay.
Yep.
Now the different types of industrial hemp that you might have. Standing in here, we can see that this is lush green. It's still green, very green. But in other portions, I can see the ones that have already dried and there are gentlemen doing some measurements and stuff.
Yes.
Maybe the trials or the different varieties or types that you have here at Kutsaga that you're already working on.
So we are working on industrial hemp. Industrial hemp essentially has 3 forms. So you've got your industrial hemp for the grain, you've got industrial hemp for fiber, you also have industrial hemp for CBD flour. So the field or the experimental plot that we're standing in today, this is essentially material. It's in 2 forms, so it's a dual purpose crop. So we've got grain as well as fiber.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Matewa, can we talk about when this was established? I know it is a trial, but when was it established and how long does it take for it to reach up to maturity, this plot that we are standing in? When are you expecting to harvest it?
Okay, so that all depends on genetics. So different varieties will perform differently. So the current plot that we're standing in, this one was established, as I mentioned earlier on, about 2.5 months ago. It's still lush green. It's currently at a stage where we're seeing a lot of flowering. So you've got male flowers coming up, you've got female plants also starting to produce their female floral organs. And that's what we can see in this particular plot. Yeah, so as I mentioned, it all depends on the genetics. You've got material that we can plant, we can quickly harvest after about 3 months. Some takes 4, some takes 5, it just depends on the varieties and the material that you've sown.
Okay. Yep. Now talking of the agroecological zones that might support the production of industrial hemp, is it every maybe agroecological zone here in Zimbabwe, or there are specifics with the types of soil, with the weather conditions, or with the water requirements that support industrial hemp production?
Okay, so what the Tobacco Research Board has done is we've opened up additional sites. So this one in Harare, we've got another site in Banket, we've got another site in Masvingo. So these sites essentially do have different soil characteristics, different environmental conditions as well. So we opened up those sites essentially for us to study this particular material across these different planting environments. So what we've seen is that the material does perform well in sandy loamy soils, red oxide, heavy clay soils. The only differences would be maybe the types of yields that you would get, the type and the spectra of the diseases and pests that you get as well would differ based on the location.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of maybe yield per hectare, how do you ascertain or establish? Is it in terms of tons? What is it in terms of?
Yeah, so it's essentially in terms of tons. When you're looking at the grain side of things, grain, you can just assume it's the same with wheat, soybean, and the like. So we harvest it in, and the metric would be kgs per hectare, right? So it's the same for the fiber as well, where we harvest it and we weigh it fresh, dry biomass as well, and again it's in kgs per hectare.
The uses of the fiber hemp,
Yeah.
you divided it into two sections. You spoke of the grains and now you also spoke of the fiber. I would like to believe that these two have different uses when they go on for manufacturing. What are the uses for grain and what are the uses of fiber respectively?
Fantastic question. So hemp is food, hemp is fuel, hemp is construction, hemp is a lot of things. So with regards to the grain, what farmers or any processor is able to do is you're able to cold press this. The same process that we use for soybean extracting oil is the same process that we would use to essentially extract what we call CBD oil. This CBD oil can then be fused with so many other products, whether it's skincare, pharmaceutical products, you name it, right? It can also be included as a daily supplement when it comes to maybe eating your cereal and things like that, because it's essentially food. So with regards to the fiber, what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish a high density plot where you've got slender plants that grow as tall as possible. The benefit to this is that when it comes to harvesting or processing, we're able to extract what we call the bast fiber. The bast fiber are the outer, longer fibers. These are essentially going into textiles, clothing, bags, shoes, you name it, right? And then the inner heads, which are the shorter fibers, are essentially going into products like particle boards, right? Construction materials such as bricks. So there are certain locations where people have already started making construction material using this. Insulation material for housing as well. The uses are just a lot.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Mateo. That was very detailed. On that note, viewers, we're going to go on a short commercial break. We'll be right back with this and more in terms of industrial hemp production here in Zimbabwe. Don't go anywhere. Thank you, Zimbabwe, for staying tuned to Agricultural New Directions, Agribusiness in support of Vision 2030, where we are talking of industrial hemp production here in Zimbabwe. You would find that every value chain emanates from research. And today we are going to be looking at the various trials that Kutsaga is undertaking to ensure that our farmers, when they get into this industry, they are well equipped with the knowledge that they require to remain viable in this business. Now, viewers, we encourage you to be a part of these conversations. Feel free to get in touch with the producer, Wazanai Manyore. It's on 0772 807-506. Alternatively, you can like our Facebook page, Agribusiness with Wazanai. Leave your comments and suggestions and make a follow-up on this episode and more on our YouTube channel, Agribusiness with Wazanai. We are also now available on Twitter, where most of these discussions take place. Is at Agribusiness 110. Now, earlier on, before we went to the break, Dr. Kumbire Matewa here was highlighting the differences in the uses between the grain and the fiber. Dr. Matewa, we are here in the second segment. Welcome back.
Welcome. Thank you.
As we get into our discussion, we are standing in here where I can see that this hemp is already dried.
Yeah.
How long does it take from planting up to reaching this stage, senescence or drying up?
So again, it all depends on the genetics. So you do get varieties that can essentially from start to end in about 3 months. This particular plot, this one took about 4.5 months from start to end.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were talking of the uses of fiber. You spoke of the uses of the grain hemp and also speaking of fiber. Now that we are standing where I can see these long straws, can you pick from there and elaborate further what happens with the fiber?
Okay. So with fiber, what we are going after are two basic raw materials. There's what we call the outer bast fiber, which is the longer threaded fibers, and then the inner heads, which are the shorter fibers inside the plant. So soon after harvesting, soon after they reach physiological maturity, we harvest them, chop them down. We leave them, we lay them in the field, allow them to start rating. So we call it rating, so dew rating, but there are other different forms of rating as well. But what we use here is dew rating, where we allow them to start breaking down using the microbes in the soil, as well as a bit of moisture. So they'll start breaking down. The breaking down process allows us to separate those two materials much faster.
Okay.
Yeah. So after this, we'll rate this for about 1.5 weeks. We'll come in, then we'll start collecting the material. We've gotten a small-scale research unit, a decorticator, that we then use to process and come up with these two fibers that I mentioned.
Now, for a farmer, Dr. Matiwa, you would find that in tobacco,
Yeah.
we do grading, we do reaping, curing, grading, baling,
Yeah.
and a good presentation of the crop as it goes for the market. As a farmer, what are the stages that he needs to get into, and finally, as he heads to the market? Does he also have to go through this, or this is specifically for a trial? What does he do? Does he also go through grading, baling? What does he do?
Yeah, so again, it depends on the type, whether it's industrial hemp for the fiber, the grain, or the CBD flower. So for this particular fiber, I mentioned that the processes or the similarities would essentially be the fact that you would also have ridges, which is essentially similar to what we have with tobacco. The reason being, we want to make sure that the plant is not sitting inside water. The plant hates water. It doesn't like heavy clay soils as well. So you want to make sure that the plants are situated in such a way that they are not going to be affected by a lot of water. Some similarities that would have maybe would depend on the other type, but for this one, you quickly rate, come in, you bale it, and then it's off to the industrial processor. But with regards to, let's say, CBD flower, again, we're using raised beds for the same purpose of making sure that the plant is not sitting inside too much water. But we do have processes such as curing after harvesting to make sure that the chemical compounds that are within the plant start behaving the way we expect them to behave. So curing definitely comes into play.
Okay, do they cure using firewood?
Yeah, so it's very different from tobacco because it's not a forced air type of system. Yeah, just making sure you control the humidity, you control the temperature as well, so that it's a slow drying process, sorry.
Okay,
Yeah.
now let us talk about the basic agronomic practices in terms of the fertilizer application regimen, or even water application. You say that the crop might actually doesn't love water that much, meaning you can get away with producing it without necessarily using irrigation. Is that correct?
So what we are essentially looking at with regards to our experiments and our trials is to try and assess which periods a farmer would essentially come in and do cropping. So we've essentially identified a period just after winter when your heat units start going up, where you can come in with essentially an irrigated crop if you've got irrigation. So you're irrigating that particular crop. You can then come in with another tandem crop as well, where this one maybe would mostly fall within the rainfall period. So it would be a rain-fed crop. And then you can also come in sometime February, March with another cropping cycle. Again, it all depends on the time frame the plant or the genetic requires to reach physiological maturity. But the last phase would be for you to come in sometime around February, March. You can get away with it before you start having issues to do with the temperature drop as we approach winter.
In terms of fertilizer, what do you use for basal dressing and top dressing?
Yeah, so we are essentially using compound D. And what we've essentially realized is there's still a lot to do with regards to identifying the right fertilizer requirements for the particular crop. It's all new research that we are currently conducting, but we do have values to it where we're looking at maybe for nitrogen about 120 kgs of N per hectare. For phosphorus, you're looking at almost 100 kgs of P per hectare, and maybe with your potassium about 160.
Okay. In terms of pests and diseases, generally in cropping you would find that pests and diseases are a menace, they are a nuisance.
They are.
What are some of the pests that specifically attack industrial hemp? You spoke of the grains, maybe the CBD flower and the fiber. Do we have pests and diseases that might affect the quality of this produce?
Yes, we do. Great question. So what we've also been identifying through all our research is that the crop, because of maybe the number of cycles that we've had to grow the crop, we haven't really identified a lot of the pests and disease spectrums that we expect to see, because it's still a new crop, but we expect with more cultivation, we should start seeing an increase in the number of pests and diseases that we see in the crop. So for example, for the crops that we've established, we've already seen cutworms, we've seen grasshoppers, we've seen aphids, we've seen a lot of pythium root rot, early seedling stage, we've seen a lot of blights as well, we've seen a lot of bacterial leaf diseases as well. So it's still a lot of work to be done with regards to the research side of things to actually identify, classify the diseases and the pests, so that we essentially know what the farmer needs to be doing with regards to his IPM.
Finally, as we round off, Dr. Matewa, you would find that in Zimbabwe generally, most of our farmers might not have equipment, or maybe struggling with maybe capital injections to undertake industrial hemp production. Are there any apparatus or any tools or equipment that is specific that a farmer needs to have if he's going to get into industrial hemp production? You would find that in tobacco production, you cannot be a tobacco farmer if you do not have curing facilities. If you do not have maybe a robust set of maybe irrigation, if you want to fetch higher prices, market prices in terms of your quality, your yield, you will need irrigation. When it comes to industrial hemp production, is there any set of infrastructure that a Zimbabwean farmer needs to have? If he doesn't have that, he cannot get into industrial hemp production, or it's just simple, you don't need a lot of capital injections?
Good question. It's actually simple. You'd start essentially from the licensing. You'd need to have the proper documentation for you to start a cultivation facility. With regards to industrial hemp, where we're looking at the fiber, the grain, and the CBD flower, we sometimes call this low-hanging fruit. It's very different from the medicinal cannabis side of things. Medicinal cannabis would be high capital injection. The facility you build out needs to be very specific and very expensive. But with industrial hemp, we see great potential there, because you're looking at an allowance for a farmer to grow outdoor. So farmers can grow outdoor, and you can essentially use what's available on the farm setup. You don't really need to invest that much, especially if you're going after grain and, let's say, fiber. You don't need to have a specific type of facility for you to have that enterprise going.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matewa. That was very detailed. There you heard it, viewers. He is saying that production of industrial hemp can be a low-hanging fruit. You do not need that much capital in terms of investment. You might just get away with your infrastructure that you already have on your farm. On that note, we are going to go on a short commercial break. We'll be right back with this and more in the third and final segment. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. We are here in the third and final segment of your program, where we are discussing industrial hemp production in Zimbabwe. But we are starting with the trials that our researchers, our plant breeders are undertaking to ensure that the Zimbabwean farmer is well equipped with the knowledge on how to go about in this enterprise. At this point in time, Dr. Matewa, we are here in the third and final segment. Welcome back.
Thank you so much.
I would like to begin this segment with talking about plant population. In tobacco, we have some people going maybe 17,000 plants a hectare. When it comes to industrial hemp, how many plants can a farmer go up to in terms of the plant population and the yield as well?
I see.
In tonnage.
So it depends on the form. Since we said there's industrial hemp for the grain, fiber, CBD, flour. So with regards to the fiber side of things, what we're trying to do is put in about 50 to 70 kgs per hectare of seed, right? And that on a square meter should give you about maybe 450 on the larger side of the scale. So about 450 plants in a square meter. And the overall plant population for fiber, you're looking at about maybe 1.2 million plants. Okay. So it's high density, so that you make sure that you get nice slender plants, as you can see here, slender tall plants. Okay. Because that makes for the best type of outer fiber, nice and long.
Okay. Yeah. Now, Dr. Matewa, you would find that in tobacco production, when we plant our tobacco, sometimes we come in with a bit of gypsum, sometimes we come in with a bit of chemicals, maybe lambda to cater for certain pests and diseases. Yeah. When it comes to industrial hemp production, do you necessarily have to come in with chemicals when planting? And even during, after planting, what sort of chemicals do you use in industrial hemp production, if there are any?
Yeah, great question. So again, since it's all research, we haven't yet identified a reason for us to apply anything right at the beginning. So what we're just doing, we're sowing and just making sure that we've got our basal application in, and then we just see how the plant develops from there. taking care of maybe our pests and diseases, minding them and seeing how they perform so that we make sure that we do not lose the whole crop.
In terms of handling, how do you handle this crop? Let's say in tobacco we have a period whereby we remove sucker removal. We have a time where we go for bud topping. In terms of handling and general agronomic practices in the field for an industrial hemp farmer, what sort of activities will he be doing? In terms of weed management, do you come with herbicides? What sort of activities will you be doing awaiting senescence or maturity?
Okay, so for the fiber side of things, this particular crop will grow nice and tall very fast. It will smoother out any forms of weeds that you have in the bed. So you shouldn't have issues to do with coming in to do any herbicide or manual weeding of any sort. There shouldn't be any issue of that sort. With regards to this particular crop, again, we said it's essentially low-hanging fruit because there's really not much to do from start to end. With regards to the CBD flower side of things, you do have to come in and do a bit of pruning just to make sure you've got a nice, decent airflow so that you don't have issues to do with gray or white mold. So you just have to make sure you're pruning your plants so that they are nice and free and there's a nice, decent airflow so that you don't have those issues coming in.
Now a farmer is headed towards harvesting. In tobacco, I keep giving reference to tobacco farming because you'd find that most of the farmers who want to get into industrial hemp are already into tobacco production. They are looking for more viable enterprises and just weighing their options. In tobacco production, you'll find that we rip the leaves. We remove the leaves when they turn a certain color and take them to the curing facilities. And we leave the stalks. We then destroy the stalks later when we come in with our winter plowing. In industrial hemp, do you uproot the entire plant? Do you take the stalks, or what do you take when it comes to handling of your post-harvest maintenance generally?
So for industrial hemp, for the grain, what you're coming in to harvest the top heads because that's where the bulk of the grain is. So you harvest that and that's that. With regards to the fiber, you're just coming in, as we mentioned earlier on, you're chopping it down, allowing it to rot, then harvesting, baling it for future processing out in the lab or wherever you're doing your processing. Then for CBD flower, essentially you can cut the whole plant down, right? It will have a lot of developed floral structures, so you cut it down and then we can take it to our drying facility. You can hang it, allow it to dry. Later on you can trim, then bag, allow to cure, and that's fine. That's enough for the market.
Okay. Finally, we have come to the end of this episode. Your recommendations, your word of advice to our tobacco farmers. The name of our program is Agriculture New Directions, Agribusiness. We talk about business finance. We talk about viability in agriculture. How do you translate your operations into making money? How do you monetize your operations? So basically, the essence of the program is to help farmers make money from their ventures. Your word of advice to our farming community, your recommendations, maybe your sentiments in terms of industrial hemp production in Zimbabwe.
Okay, so the word of advice that I would have for our farmers is to invest in alternatives and alternates to the tobacco industry. This particular crop does generate a lot of decent income with regards to whatever finished products you're looking at. And I think it would be a worthwhile investment for all our farmers in Zimbabwe if we can create and really take this particular agricultural commodity and the value chain as far as we can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matewa. It was a pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you so much, Wata.
There you heard it, viewers. We're talking of industrial hemp production in Zimbabwe from a research perspective. We haven't yet gotten into production. We are looking at trials and how research and development is going and progressing to ensure that our Zimbabwean farmers are well equipped and they are given knowledge in terms of undertaking this enterprise. From me, your host was Zanai Manyore. I'm also on Instagram. It's a W Manyore. And the crew behind the scenes. Have yourselves a fabulous evening. Thank you for watching.